They laughed at her, an old woman with shaky hands and fading memory. To them, she was nothing but a fragile shadow of her past. But when the cards touched her fingertips, everything changed. The room fell silent, because in that moment they realized memory may fade, but mastery never dies. Soft jazz music filled the air of a luxurious Manhattan penthouse where laughter, champagne, and ego floated higher than the chandeliers. Tonight wasn't just another charity event. It was a showcase of wealth, where power and arrogance met to celebrate themselves. At the center of it all stood Richard Blackwell, a billionaire known for his sharp tongue and sharper cruelty. He was the kind of man who didn't just enjoy power, he needed everyone to feel it. The guests adored his boldness, his humor, his ability to make others small for his amusement. But tonight he wanted something new, something he could brag about for years. His eyes landed on his maid, Carmen, who was quietly serving drinks, her hands trembling slightly as she carried a tray of glasses. And beside her, an elderly woman stood, her posture fragile but dignified, her eyes drifting around the room with confusion. That was Carmen's mother, Donna Rosa. Rosa looked out of place in that world of glitter and gold. Her dress was simple, faded at the edges, her gray hair tied neatly in a bun that showed care despite its age. She smiled politely when people stared, unaware of their mocking eyes. To them, she was a ghost of another world, a servant's mother, a woman forgotten by time. But to Carmen, she was everything. Rosa had once been the heartbeat of her home, until ALZHEIMER'S crept in like a thief in the night, stealing her memories piece by piece. Now she barely remembered what day it was, sometimes even who her daughter was. Yet Carmen brought her tonight, only because she couldn't leave her alone. Blackwell noticed her hesitation and smirked. "Carmen," he said, voice dripping with arrogance, "why don't your mother join us for a game?" The guests chuckled, some gasped. Carmen's eyes widened in panic. "Sir, please." "She doesn't understand anymore. My mother's ill." But that only fueled his cruelty. "Oh, come on, it'll be fun. One harmless round of poker. Let's see if Grandma remembers how to play." Laughter erupted around the table, shallow and cruel. Carmen shook her head, whispering, "Please, Mr. Blackwell, she's not well." But he ignored her, waving his hand toward the chair beside him. "Sit her down. If she wins, I'll double your salary. If she loses, well, maybe we'll find someone younger who can keep up." The words hit Carmen like a knife. The room laughed harder, some guests pulling out their phones to record, eager to capture the spectacle of an old woman fumbling at a poker table. Carmen's heart pounded as she helped her mother to the seat, whispering softly, "Mama, just stay quiet, please." Rosa's cloudy eyes drifted from the cards to her daughter's trembling face. "They want to play?" she murmured softly, as if remembering something far away. Blackwell leaned forward, grinning. "That's right, Grandma. Let's see what you've got." The dealer shuffled the cards, and the sound of the deck sliding together filled the silence. The laughter quieted for a moment as Rosa's thin, trembling hands reached for her cards. But something unexpected happened. As her fingers touched the cards, her shaking stopped. Her eyes, moments ago vacant and lost, suddenly sharpened. She looked at her hand, her gaze steady, her breathing slow. Carmen froze, sensing a change she couldn't explain. The air in the room shifted, something invisible but powerful. Blackwell threw his first bet, a smug grin on his face. "Let's make it 1,000, he said, tossing chips into the pile. "Do you even know what that means, sweetheart?" He mocked. Rosa didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on the table. She touched the cards lightly, her fingers moving with a strange confidence. She reached forward, almost gracefully, and doubled his bet. Gasps echoed. "Wait, did she just raise?" Someone whispered. Carmen's heart jumped. Rosa's expression remained calm, focused. Blackwell's smirk faltered for the first time. "So, you do know how to play?" he said, trying to keep his composure. Rosa didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed on the cards, her face calm, almost serene. It was as if the chaos of the party, the mocking laughter, the flashing lights, none of it reached her anymore. Only the rhythm of the game mattered. The dealer continued, flipping the next round. Rosa moved again, quick, deliberate. Her chips clinked against the table, steady and sure. Carmen stood silently behind her, tears forming in her eyes. It wasn't just the way Rosa played, it was the look in her eyes. For a moment, she wasn't her mother battling memory loss. She was someone else, someone powerful. The crowd began to sense it too. The laughter faded, replaced by murmurs. Even those recording had stopped. Blackwell leaned back, uneasy. He didn't like not being in control. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, forcing a smile. "Let's see how long that lasts." But Rosa finally lifted her eyes to meet his, her voice quiet but clear. "Luck," she repeated softly. "Luck is for those who don't know the game." The words hit him like a slap. A ripple moved through the room. The guests exchanged glances, uncertain whether to laugh or stay silent. Rosa leaned forward slightly, eyes locked on him, and asked, "Tell me, my son, how much is this worth?" Her tone wasn't mocking. It was steady, cutting through his arrogance like a knife through silk. Blackwell froze, unable to answer for a moment. The dealer looked uneasy. The cards paused mid-air. The air grew heavier, the lights suddenly too bright, the laughter gone completely. In that instant, something shifted in every soul in that room. The game had started, but none of them knew who they were really playing against. And as Rosa sat there, still and silent with her wrinkled hands resting lightly on the cards, a storm was beginning to rise, one that would change the meaning of power forever. The laughter that had once filled the penthouse now hung awkwardly in the air, thinning into a tense silence. The game had begun, and all eyes were fixed on the frail woman sitting across from Richard Blackwell. He leaned back in his leather chair, arrogance carved deep into every smirk. "All right, Grandma," he said mockingly, shuffling his chips with flair. "Let's make this fun. I'll start with 1,000, just to see if you can keep up." He tossed the chips into the pile, expecting the old woman to hesitate, to fumble, maybe even to give up. But Rosa didn't flinch. Her fingers, steady and sure, moved across the table, gathering her own chips. Without a word, she pushed forward double the amount, 2,000. The sound of the chips clinking against the table echoed like a thunderclap. The laughter stopped completely. Even the music seemed to fade into the background. Rosa sat upright, her back straight, her eyes sharper than anyone had seen all night. The faint tremor that had marked her hands earlier was gone, replaced by a calm rhythm that spoke of experience and control. Blackwell's smirk faltered just slightly, but his pride wouldn't let him show it. "So you do know what you're doing," he muttered almost to himself. Rosa's gaze stayed fixed on the cards, silent but certain. The dealer flipped the next card, and Blackwell couldn't resist narrating every move as if she were a child. "Now, this card, Grandma, is called the turn," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. The guests chuckled nervously, unsure if it was still okay to laugh. But Rosa didn't even look at him. Her attention was absolute. She lifted her eyes just once, to the dealer, and nodded slightly for the next round. The confidence in that small gesture unsettled the room. Behind her, Carmen watched, heart racing. She couldn't understand what was happening. The mother she had fed, bathed, and reminded of her own name just that morning was now moving like a professional at the table. Rosa's lips tightened, her focus unwavering. And then a flicker of memory returned to Carmen, an old story she'd half forgotten. She was just a child when she heard it, sitting on the porch while her mother talked about working in Las Vegas as a young waitress. She used to say, "Those casino men thought they could fool a woman with a smile, but I learned faster than they expected." Back then, Carmen thought it was just a story, a dream her mother made up to feel important. But now, seeing the way Rosa handled the cards, it all made sense. La Rosa Silenciosa. The name came back to her like a whisper from the past. The silent Rose, the quiet woman who played poker better than anyone, who never spoke at the table, who let her eyes do all the talking. Carmen felt tears rise to her eyes as realization bloomed. Her mother wasn't lost, not yet. Somewhere deep inside that fading mind, the silent Rose was still alive. The next round began. Blackwell threw in a bold bet of $10,000, his ego refusing to back down. "Let's raise the stakes," he said, smiling wide, desperate to regain control. Rosa didn't even blink. She counted her chips slowly, each movement deliberate, and then, without hesitation, pushed in 20,000. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Some of the guests leaned forward, their expressions transforming from amusement to fascination. Patricia, a sharp-eyed art collector, whispered to James, "This isn't luck. Look at her hands. Look at her eyes." James nodded slowly, watching Rosa's every move. "She's reading him," he said softly. "Every twitch, every bluff." Blackwell's jaw tightened. He could feel the shift in the air. The game no longer belonged to him. He looked across the table and saw something he hadn't expected to find in this frail old woman. Power. Not the kind that came from money or position, but something deeper, quieter, far more dangerous. Still, he refused to back down. He needed to win. Not for the money, but for the control he was rapidly losing. The dealer revealed another card, and Blackwell leaned forward, pretending confidence. "I see you're 20, and I raise it to 30, he said quickly, forcing a grin. Rosa's expression didn't change. Her eyes flicked to the cards, then to his face. For a long moment she simply stared at him, the silence stretching into something unbearable. Then, with one slow movement, she slid in her chips and matched his bet exactly. No hesitation, no fear. Carmen's heart was pounding so loudly she could barely hear herself think. Every time her mother moved, she saw the woman she once knew. The woman who used to beat her uncles at cards every Christmas, laughing softly while the men accused her of trickery. But there was no trickery in Rosa now. There was only skill, memory, and quiet fury disguised as grace. The tension in the room thickened until it was almost suffocating. Nobody dared to speak. Even the bartender froze mid-pour. Rosa was no longer just an old woman in a penthouse. She had become a force. Every motion she made commanded attention. Every look from her eyes unsettled the proud and the powerful. Finally, Blackwell broke the silence. He leaned back, crossing his arms, trying to reclaim the arrogance slipping through his fingers. "All right," he said, his grin tight, almost forced. "You've got some tricks, Grandma. Let's make this interesting." He pushed all his remaining chips into the center of the table, the sound sharp against the silence. 50,000. All in, all eyes turned to Rosa. The air held its breath. Carmen's lips trembled, whispering, "Mama, please don't." But Rosa's eyes never left Blackwell's. Slowly, almost reverently, she gathered her own chips and pushed them forward. The dealer's hands shook slightly as he adjusted the pile. Rosa leaned back, her expression calm, unbothered. Blackwell smiled, mistaking her serenity for surrender. But he didn't understand what he was really up against. The woman across from him wasn't just an old lady fighting her illness. She was a legend reborn, a mind that had once conquered tables where men far smarter than him had fallen. And as the final card waited to be turned, Rosa lifted her chin, the faintest glimmer of a smile touching her lips. The silent rose had awakened, and Richard Blackwell was about to learn that arrogance has a price no money can pay. The air inside the penthouse was heavy, thick with silence and unspoken disbelief. Moments ago, laughter had ruled this room. Now, only tension remained. The guests had abandoned their champagne flutes, their casual chatter, their smug smiles. All eyes were locked on the poker table, where two figures sat facing each other like generals before a final battle. Richard Blackwell, billionaire and master manipulator, sat with his arms crossed, eyes cold, his pride on the line. Across from him, Donna Rosa, the frail old woman he once mocked, sat calm, still, and unshaken. Her wrinkled fingers rested gently on her cards, her eyes alive with a fire no one had seen before. Carmen stood behind her mother, trembling. She wanted to stop this, to beg her to quit, but she couldn't move. There was something sacred about the way Rosa sat there, like an ancient queen reclaiming her throne. The dealer glanced nervously at both sides before flipping the next card. The crowd leaned closer. Every movement felt magnified. The shuffling of chips, the soft rustle of silk dresses, even the ticking of the chandelier clock seemed louder. Rosa studied the table. Her gaze didn't linger on the cards for long. Instead, she watched Blackwell, the way his fingers twitched, how his lips tightened when he tried to smile. She saw the same mistakes she had seen decades ago across smoky casino rooms, back when she was La Rosa Silenciosa, the Silent Rose. Her mind, fragile in so many ways, couldn't recall her daughter's age or the day of the week, but this, the rhythm of a bluff, the scent of pride. This was written deep inside her. Beyond memory's reach, Blackwell threw in his chips, his confidence rising again. 50,000, he said, his voice sharp. The crowd gasped. It wasn't just money. It was dominance, a declaration that he still controlled the game. But Rosa didn't hesitate. She matched the bet in one smooth motion, the chips sliding into the pile like a whisper of defiance. Gasps filled the air again. The dealer's hand trembled slightly as he dealt the final card. Carmen pressed her hands together, praying silently. Rosa's eyes flicked to the cards, and in that instant her mind traveled back in time. Smoky casino lights, cheers, the rhythm of cards flipping, the click of chips. She remembered faces of men who underestimated her, the same arrogant smirk now painted on Blackwell's lips. Her instincts took over, reading his posture, the false calm in his shoulders, the gleam of sweat just below his hairline. She saw it all, every detail, every lie. Blackwell leaned forward, his grin returning. "Let's end this, Grandma," he said, turning over his cards with a dramatic flair. 2 pairs, aces and kings. The crowd gasped and then broke into applause. "There it is," someone shouted. "The unbeatable hand." Laughter returned, filling the room again, this time mixed with relief. Blackwell raised his hands in mock victory, basking in the sound. Carmen closed her eyes, whispering, "No, Mama, please." But Rosa didn't flinch. Her lips curved into a faint smile. Slowly, almost ceremonially, she placed her cards on the table one by one. A 10, a jack, a queen, a king, and then an ace. A perfect straight. The highest possible without a royal flush. The room went silent, utterly silent, before an explosion of gasps and disbelief shattered the air. One of the guests dropped their glass, the sound of breaking crystal echoing through the room. Carmen covered her mouth, tears spilling down her cheeks. Blackwell stared at the cards as if they had betrayed him. "No," he muttered, shaking his head. "That's impossible." Rosa began gathering her chips, her movements slow, graceful, unhurried. It wasn't greed driving her hands, it was dignity. The same dignity he had tried to strip from her. The room's energy shifted. People were no longer laughing. They were watching history rewrite itself in front of them. Patricia, still in shock, whispered to James, "Did we just witness that?" She played him perfectly. James nodded, his voice low. "That wasn't luck. That was memory, the kind that never dies." Blackwell stood up, his face red with humiliation. "You cheated," he snapped, his voice cracking under the weight of his pride. "There's no way someone like you—" He stopped mid-sentence when Rosa raised her hand slightly, not in anger, but in quiet command. Her voice, soft yet powerful, carried across the room. "You confused money with intelligence, my son," she said. "At the table, it's not power that wins, it's patience." The silence that followed was absolute. No one dared to move. Even the doctor among the guests, who had earlier joked about her condition, spoke softly now. "It's procedural memory," he explained as if defending her honor. "It's the kind of memory that stays even when everything else fades. Skills, habits, reflexes, they don't disappear. She never forgot how to play." His words hung in the air, shifting every perception in that room. Carmen stepped closer, placing a trembling hand on her mother's shoulder. "Mama," she whispered, unable to say more. Rosa patted her hand gently, her eyes warm but distant, as if she could feel her daughter's love even when she couldn't fully remember her name. Across the table, Blackwell sat down heavily, his pride shattered. The guests avoided his gaze, their admiration for him replaced with quiet shame. But the night wasn't done testing him. He leaned forward again, his anger simmering beneath the surface. "One more hand," he said coldly. "Double or nothing." The guests murmured in protest, but his ego was too wounded to stop. He needed to win back what he lost. Not the money, but his pride. Rosa's face softened. For a moment she seemed almost sad. She looked at him the way a teacher looks at a stubborn child who hasn't yet learned. Finally, she nodded once, calm and deliberate. "Be careful what you wish for, my son," she said, her voice steady as stone. Some lessons cost everything. The room fell into uneasy silence again. The dealer hesitated, looking between them, knowing the next hand could destroy one of them completely. And as Rosa leaned forward, her hands resting lightly on the cards, everyone knew the storm that began with laughter was about to end in revelation. The room felt different now, heavier, quieter, almost reverent. The laughter that had once mocked the old woman was gone, replaced by anticipation thick enough to choke on. Everyone knew this was the final game. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about pride, power, and the line between cruelty and karma. Richard Blackwell leaned forward, his eyes burning with anger disguised as confidence. His empire of arrogance was trembling, and this game was his last desperate attempt to rebuild it. 200,000, he announced coldly, pushing his chips into the center of the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Gasps spread through the room. Even for the rich, that was no small bet. Donna Rosa sat opposite him, still and calm. Her hands rested gently on the table, her gaze soft but steady. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her silence had become her weapon. Blackwell leaned back with a smirk, trying to provoke her. "Come on, Grandma," he sneered. "You can still fold. It's not too late to walk away before you lose what little dignity you have left." But Rosa's expression didn't waver. She reached forward, gathered her chips, and matched his bet exactly. 200,000, pushed forward with quiet grace. The dealer, pale and trembling, began to deal the cards. The crowd gathered closer. Carmen stood at the edge of the table, her hands clasped tightly, praying silently. Patricia and James exchanged a look. They could both feel it. Something extraordinary was unfolding, something that would be talked about for years. Blackwell picked up his cards first. 2 queens, a strong hand. His grin widened. He glanced at Rosa, who still hadn't touched her cards. "Your move," he said mockingly. Rosa lifted her cards slowly, the corners of her lips curling into a faint smile. She said nothing. The game continued. Blackwell raised the stakes with every turn, his voice loud, his movements impatient. Each time, Rosa matched his bet without hesitation, her calm defying logic. She studied him. Not the cards, not the chips. Him. Every breath, every twitch, every flicker of pride. She was reading him like an open book, the same way she had read hundreds of men long before he was even born. The tension grew unbearable. Sweat glistened on Blackwell's forehead, though he tried to hide it behind forced laughter. "You're bluffing," he said, his voice sharp, his ego desperate for reassurance. "Old habits, right? You think a quiet face can scare me?" Rosa looked at him for a long moment, her eyes soft but piercing. Then she spoke, her voice a whisper, yet it filled the room. "No, my son," she said gently. "I think you've already scared yourself." The dealer revealed the final card. Blackwell exhaled, confident. He slammed his hand onto the table, a pair of queens glowing with false victory. "There it is," he declared, smiling triumphantly. "You played well, Grandma, but not well enough." The crowd hesitated to clap. Carmen's heart sank for a moment, until Rosa turned her cards over. 2 aces, 3 of a kind. The sound of silence fell heavier than any applause. Then came the gasps, the disbelief, the realization. She had won. Again. The old woman with Alzheimer's, mocked and belittled, had just defeated the billionaire twice in front of the world's elite. The room erupted. Some cheered, some wept, and others simply stared in awe. Carmen rushed forward, tears streaming down her face, whispering, "Mama, you did it." Rosa smiled faintly, placing her hand over her daughter's. "We did it, my love," she whispered back. Across the room, Patricia stood frozen, her phone in her hand. She had been searching the entire time, unable to shake the feeling that she recognized Rosa's technique. When she finally spoke, her voice trembled with awe. "Rosa Delgado," she said aloud, reading from the screen. They called her the Silent Rose, the woman who won the World Series of Poker in 1974, the one who vanished from the circuit without a trace. The revelation rippled through the room like fire. The woman they had mocked wasn't just lucky. She was a legend. Blackwell's smirk vanished completely. His face drained of color. The billionaire who prided himself on knowing everything about everyone had just been publicly destroyed by the very person he tried to humiliate. Rosa gathered the chips slowly, her movements calm, deliberate. When she stood, the room fell silent again. She looked at Blackwell one last time. "Pride," she said softly, "is a poor companion at the table. It always folds first." That night she took the winnings, $500,000, and did something no one expected. Within weeks, Carmen announced the founding of the Silent Rose Foundation, dedicated to supporting elderly care and Alzheimer's treatment. The story spread across the country. An old woman who had once been forgotten had become a symbol of dignity and resilience. Interviews, documentaries, donations. Her story inspired millions. 6 months later, in Zurich, Rosa walked slowly through the halls of a private clinic, her steps steady, her eyes brighter than before. The treatments had helped, her memory clearer on some days, foggy on others, but her spirit was unshakable. Carmen walked beside her, holding her arm gently. As they passed a nurse, Rosa stopped to look out a window, watching the snow fall softly against the glass. "Beautiful," she whispered. Carmen smiled, squeezing her hand. "Just like you, Mama." Meanwhile, across the ocean, Richard Blackwell sat in an empty office, his empire crumbling. The media had torn him apart. Investors fled. Videos of the poker game went viral, his arrogance, his humiliation, the moment Rosa won. He was no longer a symbol of success, but a warning of what happens when power meets humility and loses. Back in Zurich, Rosa sat in the clinic garden, a warm blanket across her lap. She turned to her daughter and smiled. "You know, Carmen," she said softly, "memory can fade, but dignity never dies. And those who underestimate you," she paused, her eyes gleaming with wisdom, "eventually learn that wisdom never grows old." As the camera of the imagination fades out, her words linger like a quiet melody, proof that true power lies not in wealth or youth, but in grace that survives every storm. Blackwell tried to humiliate a woman with Alzheimer's. In the end, he was defeated by the brilliance that no disease could erase. For more stories that prove strength doesn't come from wealth, but from resilience, subscribe to Simply Stories.